Hello, everyone. This is Father Paul, and I hope you're having a good day. You're listening to Copts in Conversation. Hello, everyone. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Archdeacon Mark Soliman, who is a prominent figure in the Coptic Orthodox Church Diocese of LA, and he serves under the guidance of His Eminence Metropolitan Serapion. Archdeacon Mark is deeply committed to his spiritual work and community engagement. He is well known for his passion in engaging and connecting with young adults across the diocese and through the Coptic Clubs at various universities. His home parish is the St. Paul Coptic American Church in Irvine, California. And in addition to his religious service, Mark is a triathlete. He has completed an Ironman, and he is also an accounting and finance professor at USC Marshall School of Business. And probably his most prominent role, and the one that relevant to our conversation today, is him being director of the Department of Church and Culture, known as Rediscover IM, within the Coptic Orthodox Diocese of Los Angeles. And this department is dedicated to addressing the unique needs of Copts in the American diaspora through a variety of ministries. Welcome, March.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here, Buna.
And I know you've been to Canada a few times. And I don't know, did you ever come to Canada during winter? Or has it all been summer?
I think last year, for some reason, I only seem to come during the winter. Last year, I came, I think, in February for a family retreat as well. And so it's cold. But I've lived in Michigan. I've lived in Chicago, so I'm kind of used to
the colder weather.
Coat and
Well, the joke's on you. It's always winter in Canada. We have a couple of weeks that we call summer.
Yeah.
But mostly it's winter. So this Department of Church and Culture caught my attention because I've never seen anything like it in any other diocese. And it seems like this is exactly what we need, the kind of conversation, the kind of issues that we need to tackle. And what's the story here? How did it begin? Where did it come from?
So His Eminence Metropolitan Serapion, he's quite a visionary, I have to say. And he approached me a little over a year ago and asked me if I would sort of head up a ministry devoted to, and it started with kind of youth, maybe what we call GYP, graduate and up. And then it quickly, as we started having discussions as to what this would look like, it quickly emerged into something a bit bigger. And it wasn't just a youth issue, but it became a cultural issue. Like, how do we serve these people? And I think, the conversation started with, we need to figure out why the youth are leaving. And to that end, I spent several months just doing research, talking to lots of people who left the church, people who left and came back, going on, looking at surveys online, Orthodox church stuff, reading all kinds of documentation, and really put together a very long list of reasons why youth are leaving. And then I had AI sort of morph that down into like 9 or 10 major points. And then I gave several actually talks about this topic, like why are the youth leaving? And those talks kind of went viral. And so I presented Emma Serapion sort of the results of all of this stuff. And he looked at it for like 30 seconds and he said, okay, what are you going to do about it? And then that's sort of what we devoted the next year to, which is, obviously the parish church and the parish priest, that's the bread and butter, that's the meat and potatoes of the spiritual life. And so that's there, and that's where people go to be fed. And so you can't replace that, that's the sacraments. But what you can do is look for places where you can be a resource to that process, right? So the priests and the churches all overwhelmed, all, under a lot of pressure, and they're just kind of hanging on to hold on to doing the services. And so some churches are big, have a lot of resources, some don't. So providing resources that maybe don't make sense for a particular parish to spearhead themselves, but you can have the diocese pull together some of the best resources we have in the diocese, and then organize it such that everyone can benefit from these individuals that we have, and kind of coordinate the effort. So the idea was to sort of serve the people in North America, the American people, in the way they need to be served. Think about how they need to hear Orthodoxy and how they need to understand it, and approach it from that kind of Western ear. And in Emma Serapion's words, to be very Orthodox yet very American.
Right.
And in your case, Canadian. And and he told me a story that he shared it and said he went to someone's house once. And, he's saying, how are the kids? Just a simple, and they said, oh, the grades say that they're not Americanized. And he said, what do you mean by that sentence? And they said, oh, they don't do drugs. They don't sleep around. They don't. And he goes, oh, so in your mind, the word American means sin.
Right.
They're not sinners, when they said, and it bothered him. Like, we have this very negative view, like American is the devil, American is the enemy. And what it creates is a very us versus them culture, right? So then if they're all the bad guys, then we need to isolate our kids, protect our kids from them. And unfortunately, that approach just doesn't work, because our kids, like it or not, if not this generation, the one after, they are Canadian or American. And we have to relate to them the way they need to be related to, and talk to the way they need to be talked to, and preach just like Christ did, and like St. Paul did, preach the gospel to them in a way that they can understand. In the case of Christ, really simple examples about farming and fishing and, stuff they got. And we have to continue to be innovative. And this is what we see in the fathers. The fathers were so innovative.
Right.
They quoted modern people. They quoted modern thinkers, modern writers. They quoted philosophy, Plato. They knew that's what the people understood. And so they would teach, Athanasius in particular would teach through this philosophy and try to free the theology from the philosophy and pull it all out. So this is, ultimately the big vision of what we're trying to do. So anyway.
Absolutely. And this is exactly the kind of thing I see in my own ministry, that in some people, their vision of a larger community is that, no, this is evil, this is something that we just need to isolate from. But at the same time, the irony is that this is the place that you left everything to immigrate to, right? And in the minds of most people, the West is Christian. So it's kind of like it's like a paradox, or there's inconsistency there. Like, how is it that you chose to leave the comfort and safety and the relative, spirituality of the East, of Egypt, and then come to a place where this kind of stuff is happening? Why would you put your family in that kind of place? So it doesn't really make sense, right? And the point of us being here is almost always lost. Like, I'm here for me to take as much of this place as I can. It's for my own benefit. But as you can see, like, this is the water we swim in now. We're all westernized to one degree or another, to one level or another, in one way or another. Like, this is how we think, and we need to take that seriously, rather than thinking that this is something that I need to weed out of my children. Rather, that the question is, like, what am I called to do here? Yeah. What's the point of me being here? It's not just because somehow I won the lottery and I got a visa and a ticket to America and or to Canada, if I couldn't get into America, and then that's it. But there's a reason I'm here. And I think some of those reasons are, we talked about it a little bit general, but in the vision statement of the ministry, it gets a little bit more detailed. So when you say things like, we need to speak with them as they see themselves, as they are, where they meet the people where they are. How do you flesh this out? What exactly do you mean by that?
I mean, this is a great point, because, when we immigrated to the United States, we came as immigrants. We didn't come as missionaries. And had we come as missionaries, and so like when the Coptic Church goes to any other country, it doesn't go to conquer another country. It goes and, you look at what they're doing in Africa, right? For example, it's presenting, Kenyans, for example, with orthodoxy and letting them be Kenyan, and not trying to convert them to being Copts. And so we have to, as Christians, I mean, that's the Great Commission, we're to go and baptize all nations, in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so we have a responsibility as Christians not to isolate. I mean, we are called to be the light of the world. We're not called to isolate. And in the history of the church, starting with the apostles, and we're an apostolic church, starting with the apostles, they were just spreading out everywhere, talking and preaching, and being light to this world. And so this is a duty that we have. It isn't so much even, we need to protect ourselves from. No, it's the opposite. We need to go into the world. And this large fear of us versus them, it paralyzes us, right? And it's at its core, it's actually not Christian, to say an us versus them. It's all us. There is no them. We're all God's sons, and we're all sinners, and we're all broken, and we all need each other in different ways. So I think that the first way that we start this process is seeing the world around us for actually what it is. The reality is there is no enemy here, right? These are the sons of God, just like I'm the sons of God. Christ didn't come for the northeast corner of Africa. He came for the whole world. Saint Athanasius says his arms were open when he was crucified. So that I think is our first objective. Is once we can stop demonizing everyone else, it works. And I think part of the issue that we found is many parents have tried this approach. And I was born in Jersey City 54 years ago, right? And I've watched generations of people lost. I think of my own youth group growing up lost,
right?
Because all we did is demonize the outsiders. Don't be like the Americans. Americans are bad. They're gonna blah blah blah. And then the kids go out in school and they're like, these kids aren't bad. Their parents are really nice. This guy actually serves the poor. And now you've spent all your time telling everyone how bad these people are, and then they realize you're wrong, and now you lose credibility as a parent, right? And so and now the church loses credibility, right? Because the church may have your Sunday school teacher may have demonized everybody else, and then you attend and you hear and you talk and you're like, these people are great, So that ability to just see God's image in everybody, I think that's that first step, and Christ took it to the extreme, and he said, not only just everybody, the enemy you have to love, right? And that's the guy who's got a sword who's coming at you, forget, the liberals or the whatever community. So I think has to be our first step, is just to remove that. That's why when we started our American Coptic churches in Los Angeles, we're very particular to put the word American in the name, and to a lot of people, this was scandalous. It's kind of like saying American Coptic is the same as saying devil Christ, like how could you put those two together? But Satan was very purposeful. He's like, we need to destigmatize that word,
by putting it in the name.
By putting it in the name, because we're all we're Americans, and we're citizens of this country. And he always quotes Pope Shenouda, who used to talk about how Copts love their country of Egypt, right? And he said, and that was okay, and if he said, can I take what Pope Shenouda said and just replace the word America, since that's where I live now, or Canada, and we should be able to do that, if we truly are a Catholic church, as we say, if we're a universal church and not, again, limited to a particular country, then we need to be able to adapt and go anywhere. And if we can't, and all we can do is isolate ourselves and huddle around our old culture and our own traditions and ourselves, then we may suffer the fate of some of these other Eastern Orthodox churches who have come before us. Some of those, like the Russian church, it was decimated at some point. And there's nobody in it but 3 old ladies for a while, just because they insisted, no, we're Russians, and all their kids
pray Russian, we sing Russian,
everything, and all their kids are like, actually, we're not Russian, and that's the outcome. So it behooves us, it helps us to look at history, forget long-term history, just the history of America and what worked and what didn't, and not make the same mistakes,
right? Because
our churches are packed because of immigration. But they won't be for long.
And we take that, as a sign that we're doing something right.
We're doing the great,
It's bolstered by immigration. As soon as it slows down, and in some cases, it's starting to reverse, where people are like, hey, you know what? Life in Egypt, if I can get, a salary from the U.S. and or get paid in Canadian dollar and live in Egypt, like that's the dream, right?
Yeah. And so, the churches are full. There's lots of money. Everyone's happy. But, to use an expression I heard, it's like there's internal bleeding, and the patient looks fine.
Right.
You don't see any blood on the outside, but there's internal bleeding and something bad's happening.
Yeah.
And, I talk with so many people, and I'm sure you come across, so many kids are just slow exodus, right? In their 20s, they just kind of drift away.
It's like slow and silent.
Silent exodus. Yeah. And it's, and because the churches are full, we're not noticing as much. It takes a lot of work to get those youth back. and but that's our future, and we have to be aware because when you're successful, that's the most dangerous time, right? Because then you take your eye off the corner around what's coming around the corner.
Right.
Churches are full, lots of money, we're building buildings, wonderful. That's when you're most vulnerable if you're not seeing what's coming next.
Because you tend to look at short-term things and short-term objectives. Because what's happening right now is great, and I have all these people in the church every Sunday, so that's great. But what's coming around the corner should be of great concern to all of us, right?
Yeah.
And we do hear that a lot. I mean, in conversations, especially with young people that come and ask, my friends from school are good people. They're not as bad as you described them. They're not as bad as you said they were, or it's not all bad outside and all good inside. In fact, some of them, my friends from outside of the church, are better than my friends inside the church. And it reminds me of this Russian Gulag survivor, Shulnitsyn, after he came out of the work camp in Siberia, and he returned to his Orthodox faith, and he wrote his memoirs. He said, I thought it used to, the line separating good and evil, runs between countries or between people, between the guards and the prisoners, between those in power and those who are being oppressed. It doesn't. It runs through our very hearts. Every heart has good and evil. And unfortunately, if we have this impression of the West that it's dark and it's evil, and we even see it in the doxology of St. Athanasius, the dark West, it's enshrined in our prayers. But at the same time, this is where we chose to come. This is where we are choosing to live. And if this is how we see it, then it's logical that we're going to be isolating and, staying in our ethnic enclaves and staying, within that bubble and trying to recreate a piece of back home for the sake of not having to interact with the outside world. So like you were saying, we didn't come as missionaries. We came as immigrants, and as immigrants seeking a better life. And anything that threatens that vision, that dream, is a problem, right? Anything that takes our focus off of that dream is a problem. So, the Great Commission, while great, it's secondary to the primary goal of why we're here. We're here to make a great life for ourselves. And if we're able to put a light on that and reverse that and say, no, our focus is not, economic prosperity, but it's the Great Commission. We start to see, the image of God in every single person that we meet.
Well, and the sad part is so many people, they come for the wealth and the prosperity, and they achieve it, and then they lose their kids, and then it's like, what did we do all this for? My sons or whatever, my daughters, whatever, and I've lost them, and they're drug addicts, or they're married outside the church, or they don't come anymore, and so it actually turns out, if you want to capture your kids, you have to be that example, right? They have to see you in love with Christ, not just in love with preserving a heritage of what we did in Shobra, and if we can just do it like we did in recreate Shobra, we win. They need to see you serving, they need to see you loving, they need to see you helping people, and that's the impression, right? So it turns out when you take your eye off the ball and the Great Commission becomes number two, you actually might lose your kid too, and despite gaining and then you feel, at the end of your life, like, why did I come here, and why did all this happen?
What was the point of all of this?
What's the point of all this,
Absolutely. So I want to just pause for a second and go back to something you said about the time you spent researching why kids are leaving church. And you said you distilled it down to 9 and 10 points. If you're able to take us briefly through those, that would be great, or at least highlights of those.
Yeah, okay. Let me see if I could think of them. There's several of them. I think the big ones come down to seeing the church as a means, as the end, as the goal. A lot of the youth see things as being overly ritualistic and losing the focus on what really matters. And it turns out it's sort of a good sign when our kids say, you know what, we're doing all these things, but there's no love in your heart, Dad. You know, where's the caring for the poor? Where's the things that Christ said in Matthew 25? That means you raise them right. You know, that means that's a good thing. You know, and I think sometimes they get disillusioned when they see us, the adults, not focused on those things. And they're like, you know, I'm reading my Bible like you told me, and I'm actually reading it, I think, better than you are, Dad and Mom. And this is what I'm seeing, but I'm not seeing it in you. I'm not seeing it in the services. I'm not seeing it. So that's one reason. Another one is they're looking for an example of Christ in the church, someone who will be that light to them, just an example of what it's supposed to look like. And it doesn't take many. You know, you can have a church full of people judging you and all this other stuff, but man, there's that one guy every Sunday, he sees you and he gives you that hug and he really wants to hear about your week. And you almost want to go just to see that one person, you know. And we can all think of that one Sunday school teacher that changed us, and not because they gave good lessons, you know, but because they loved. And I don't remember any of my other Sunday school teachers, or do I remember any of the lessons, but I remember he loved me, you know. And those are the kinds of touches that they're really looking for. Another reason people leave is they view the church as bigoted, homophobic, racist. And there's aspects of that, unfortunately, that I would say are true. You know, there's some language I'll hear sometimes. And let me step back here. When I say the church, I usually don't mean the church. I mean the parents. Right. Forgive me. They hear things from the parents about you know, homosexuals, or about black people, or about whatever. It's just over the top. And unfortunately, because of the way the culture is, the parents don't see it. They're like, well, you know, what's wrong with saying those things? But when you live in a multicultural society like, you know, Canada or the United States, you know, we've been taught from the early ages, you must tolerate everyone, every religion, every language, every color, everything, right? Otherwise, we all just start fighting, you know? That's how a multicultural has to stay together. We tolerate everyone. There's no right or wrong. And then you come along and you say, well, you know, all black people are whatever, right? And it's like, holy moly, you know, I can't believe you just said that, Dad. So that's another thing that's perceived that way. A lot of youth have very judgmental experiences at church. They're scared of the people at church. They're scared of being found out at church. I know parents that tell their kids, don't post anything on Instagram because what if someone at church sees it? Right. You know, which means the person you're scared of is the body of Christ that's standing next to you on Sunday. That's your biggest fear on earth. Right. You know, and so this whole idea of let's look at perceptions and what are people going to think of us and our family and our reputation. And this stuff is destroying families completely. And so then you become scared of the people at church. You're judged by the people at church. And then after a while, you know, you get in your 20s and you're like, you know, I'm not interested. And this is why, you know, like, and I can speak, you know, I don't know how it is in Canada, but in LA, you have a lot of kids college kids who their best friends aren't Coptic. Their best friends are at school, their roommate in college, in the dorm, someone in class, because they don't want to tell the Coptic kid something, because if that Coptic kid tells his mom, his mom's going to tell planet Earth, you know? So you got to hide stuff from the Coptic kids, right? So your good friends are not Coptic. My Coptic friends, I keep them on a short leash, on a need-to-know basis, right? Very few I trust, and eventually, even the ones I trust burn me and talk because we have a gossip culture. So then it creates very superficial relationships between the youth. There's no, you know, like the way St. James talks about the church of confess your sins to one another, right? Of this community of believers, of sinners who open up to one another and love and try to help each other, like a real community in Christ. You know, they don't have that. They have the, you know, how are you? Good. How are you? Good. The fake stuff, the superficial stuff. And then you go into the houses and the homes and it's a fire, you know, it's a disaster. But people aren't talking, and all of a sudden you hear, oh, we're getting divorced. It's like, we had no idea there was a problem. Well, I was scared to tell you, I'm fighting with my husband because you're going to gossip. And so I don't have a community, And so the youth really don't react well to that because in Western society, we don't have that kind of stigma, Like you'll meet someone, you'll just meet him like 2 days and he'll go, yeah, I'm an alcoholic, I'm a recovering alcoholic. And he'll just say that.
Yeah.
No Egyptian guy will tell you I'm a recovering alcoholic at church, right? He's just not going to bring that up.
Because that threatens that sanitized image, right?
Exactly, right? And then my kids won't get married because abuhum, Khomargi or whatever, right? So that kind of openness and transparency, that's something in Western culture. It's actually very nice. It's very freeing, and you know what you're getting, and no one's trying to play games, and no one's trying to hide anything. You don't get that. And so the kids are used to that openness. And then they come to church and everybody's locked down. Their parents are scaring them. Don't wear this. The people will talk about you, and then we impose things and we say, okay, dress really good for church so that people don't talk about you, instead of saying, dress really respectful for church because you're standing before God and do this from your heart and wear whatever you want, but do it from your heart for God. That's a beautiful way to say it. Versus the people are going to talk about you at Titlai Soma, and have a reputation, and then...
And even if people don't talk, when you're thinking that way, you're going to see every look, every gesture as judgment.
You've taught the girl every time a tunt or someone turns around at you, oh, there she goes judging you, she's going to talk about you. Exactly. And I've had young girls say, I stood there at a wedding and I just felt 30 eyes behind me. And I think half it was in her imagination.
Right.
But doesn't matter. Her mom has fed her that everyone there is out to get you.
Right.
And this is not the loving community. This isn't the hospital St. John Chrysostom talked about,
Exactly. It's more like a courthouse.
It's a courthouse, exactly. Yeah.
And there was actually some similarities between this is a book I read recently, You Lost Me. And it talks about why young Christians are leaving church and rethinking faith. And some of those reasons you mentioned are highlighted in the book as well. So the church, overprotective. Relationships are shallow, repressive, anti-science, exclusive. The church is doubtless, meaning does not allow them to express their doubts, right? They feel the church's response to doubt is that you can be talking about doubt, right? And it's these things that keep coming again over and over in research, in surveys, Barna Group, Pew Research. This stuff keeps happening, but there's a tendency to think, not us, never us, right? This is other churches that have to deal with these issues. The Coptic Orthodox Church is strong, is protected by God from all of this. But in reality, we're all swimming in the same water, and our children are facing these issues. And if we don't come, face to face with them, if we're hiding from them or pretending that they don't exist, I don't see any other way it could end. Right. But services like this that tackle these things, these very uncomfortable ideas head on, this is exactly what's needed to move the conversation forward.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's actually one of the other things that came up in the surveys is, sexual topics, for example, very taboo. We don't talk about them. And I think we sometimes, have a misguided understanding and saying, well, if I talk to someone about homosexuality, if we talk about this topic, what if the kids want to try it out and become gay or something? It just doesn't work like that, and so I think the youth are very keen of what we are and are not talking about, and they notice we're not talking about things. And, like you mentioned, science, and sometimes you'll hear people just attack evolution as if it's from the devil, and there's nothing to hide from, Darwin's theories, and without getting into it, I mean, so they're fine, natural selection, sure, the bird with the big beak can eat and the bird with the small beak can't, so the bird with the small beak dies, that's not going to threaten my belief in God in any way, right? And when our kids see us scared of evolution, scared of these things, they're kind of curious, why are you so scared? And when they see us fearless, they're not. My son was in 8th grade, and he came up to me and said, I don't know if I believe in God because my biology teacher taught us about evolution. Right. And I had to take a deep breath. That's not something you want to hear your 8th grader say. And I took a deep breath and I was like, oh, yeah, evolution, like natural selection, survival of the fittest. He goes, oh, you know about those? And I go, of course, and I told him all about it. I said, those are fine. There's nothing wrong with those. Those are great theories. And does that mean there's no creator? I don't think so. In fact, it's not scientific for you to extrapolate from those theories to say there is no creator, right? And I talked about the, hypothesis development and the scientific method. And he's like, oh, you heard about, So when he saw me calm, he was calm. And he wasn't scared. He saw I wasn't scared of these things. And so he wasn't scared of these things. So I don't know if I got off on that.
No, but that's perfect, because you taught him more by how you responded rather than just the content of the response, but how you responded. That was an equally important lesson.
And if I'd gone off and like, these teachers are teaching you, they're from
call
the devil,
board and
call the principal,
demand,
I'm going to pull you out of the class,
exactly.
I'm going to embarrass you. So then the kid goes, oh, okay, I'm not going to talk to my dad about this topic anymore because he's kind of crazy, right? So this topic is off limits for my dad. Oh, no, Dad, I believe in God, don't worry about it.
Yes.
And I'm not going to talk to you about it, right?
Yeah.
And so we've actually taught them not to talk to us by our reactions.
Right.
And so this is, I think, again, one of the many things, and so that's why the ministry now has moved into, because when Satan started, he said, start with the 22s and up, and I was like, Satan, the problem started in 8th grade. It didn't start at 22. That's when they left. Isn't when the problem started. And so if you can get to the kid before that, and you get to the parent before that, and try to give them these tips and try to help them out, at least, try a different approach than what did work in Egypt, and it did. It was successful, but it worked in that culture because that culture thought a certain way.
Right.
And so it worked beautifully. And
there was a reason it worked in Egypt.
It's a reason. And it actually evolved in Egypt to work. Like they tried different things that didn't work. Right. And this is the one that worked. And so, when someone says, well, it's worked for 2,000 years, in Egypt, why, it should work here. It's like, well, we moved, right? And in the history of the church, right, it doesn't happen ever that a church, is integrated in a culture for 2,000 years and then just switches continents.
Yeah.
Like that. That just doesn't, that's never happened. That's an experiment we've never seen before. Right? So culture and religion always mix, and that's healthy and it's beautiful. And we express our Christianity culturally. You go to Ethiopia, it looks Ethiopian. You go to Russia, it looks Russian. You go to Syria, it looks Syrian. You go to Egypt, it looks Egyptian. It's beautiful. That's the way it should be. But now you're in America or Canada, and so it's got to look American, right? And you can't be scared of that sentence, because that's the way it is in every other country,
I mean, if history's will tell us anything, in Syria, when the Arabs came, by the 8th century, they had a Syrian Bible. They translated. For us in Egypt, it wasn't until the 10th century. So we had a couple of 100 years to see if this whole Arab thing is going to stick around, or maybe they'll move on. Something else will happen. So we don't have to translate. We kept, things in Coptic, but we begin to see these Copto-Arabic translations and writings pop up around the 10th century. So does that mean we have to wait a couple of 100 years to see, authentic American Orthodoxy? And part of the context, it's important to highlight that in Egypt, when the Sunday school movement began to take root, Egypt is very, it's bicultural. The dividing line is very clear. We know where we are, where the other camp is, Christians and Muslims and relations and questions that keep popping back and forth between the two camps and what to say. And the mentality is that, no, it's not about interaction. It's about knowing how to defend that line, how to stay on your line and not to lose any ground to the other camp. But here in America, and especially in Canada, it's very multicultural. Yeah. How many lines are around you that you must maintain? What are you going to say to this group of people? That in GTA alone, in the Greater Toronto area, we have over 70 languages being spoken. Imagine how many groups and how many ideas about things and about life and about God and about everything surround us. And how you intelligently and thoughtfully interact with all of these, rather than just be, I'm scared of everyone, I'm just going to keep everyone out, I'm going to stay, within my own bubble, my own echo chamber, and just hear my own voice being echoed back to me.
I mean, a very simple example where we're building a church in our church in LA, and the I'm on the board, and we discussed putting up a fence around the church, and
It's St. Paul's, right?
At St. Paul's, yeah. And and in lots of churches there's a fence, and you go to Egypt, there's a big fence with steel swords on top of it, right? And it's like, this is us, and you guys stay outside,
Right.
But when I drive around the United States and I look at lots of different churches, there's no fences. It's open. The parking lot's open. It's welcoming. There isn't this big wall between us and them with
It's not
spears.
a gated community.
Gated, exactly, right? It's like, welcome, come. We're part of the community. Whereas our churches feel sometimes like, okay, we're in your community, but we're not. We don't want you in here, and and we're Egyptian here. And if you're not, if you're one of those other 230 countries, we're not really interested. And that's the feeling you get. And it's difficult to understand that when you're in it.
Right.
But I always give people the thought experiment. I say, walk into a Chinese church, just go in there. And I'm sure everyone's talking Chinese. And you walk up to a conversation, it's all Chinese in the hall. And then someone looks at you and goes, oh, hi, welcome, happy you're here. And then they turn around, they talk in Chinese. You're not going to stay there very long, right?
Yeah.
I mean, 2-3 weeks, and you'll be like, hey, I don't think this is the church for me.
I'm not fitting in.
I don't fit in here, right? And they're nice. They didn't do anything wrong. They're not trying to alienate you. And I think we have to realize that when people from the outside come into our churches, that's how they feel. No one's trying to alienate them. But it can be exclusionary, just the language, just the gates, the fences, the certain things are, this is, not for everybody.
All these obstacles that you must overcome before you're accepted into the group.
And then, what happens when you have this discussion is people quickly say, oh, okay, so do you want to just give up the sacraments now and become Protestant? And you're like, yeah, Habibi.
Like taking it to the extreme.
Like who said any of these things?
Like equating, the Coptic with the sacrament.
Exactly.
Right.
And it's like, no, I mean, St. Mark, when he came to Egypt, he picked up these these pharaonic hymns. I mean, let's think about this. Pharaonic hymns, that's paganism.
Right.
I mean, these things are from the devil.
Yeah.
And he said, you guys have these devil hymns, no problem.
These are pharaonic worship songs.
Let's use them. I mean, if we did that now, people would go crazy.
Right.
Of course, right? But look at the open-mindedness of how you approach another country, and you go in and you morph into their culture, not try to, isolate yourselves from it.
Right. I mean, it's hard to do that when you actually know very little about the culture. You've engaged, on a very superficial level with the culture, and then you try to separate, the wheat from the chaff. You're trying to separate what is elements that are, light bearing or capable of bearing the light of the gospel from elements that really it's just all darkness, and you throw the baby with the bathwater, and you just it's easier, more comfortable to say, like, I don't want any of this, just get rid of it all.
And the funny thing is, so like in the 1970s when people first immigrated to the United States, and my dad came in 1968 or something.
Wow.
The church, there's two extremes that evolved. And back then, that a more popular extreme was, hey, we're American now, forget the Coptic church, let's break away, let's do Protestant songs, let's do worship, let's do blah, 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 right? So either extreme is dangerous, right? Which is the, let's throw everything out and just dissolve into this culture, versus the let's completely isolate from this culture. And I think the process that you're talking about is going to take a while. Like, we have to be thoughtful about it and think about it, prayerfully look at every little piece of it and say, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Is this beautiful or not, right? And there can be elements of beauty in things that are secular, and this is what we saw the ancient fathers, St. John Chrysostom, St. Athanasius, do all the time in their writings, is find beauty, godly beauty in the secular, you know. And so plenty of that is here, you know. There's plenty of Christmas carols that are just beyond deep, beyond beautiful, like really amazing theology, so enlightening, you know. And then there's, you know, the reindeer and the Christmas tree and the whatever, right? So, you know, does that, you know, either extreme is Christmas carols are haram, okay, bad extreme, or let's just sing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer in church. Yeah. Both of them are
during the distribution.
Yeah, they're both bad solutions, right? Yes. But so either extreme, it's always in the middle, right? And I think we need to allow ourselves that opening to say, can I look for good here? Yeah. And be very rooted, and this is why education is so important, is very rooted in your orthodoxy. And I find that when people go to seminary and they really read and they really learn, they become more open-minded, not less, because they understand, okay, the church is very adaptive, you know. You know, when you hear someone say like, oh, this is the way we've done it since the time of the apostles, well, you know that's not true, right? Anyone who's read a book knows that's not true. And so then that's just ignorance speaking. And then as soon as I do read a book, I realize, oh, that's wrong, you know. So I think education is the solution here, education and spirituality, right? And, you know, learn about your faith, learn what's right and what's wrong, and don't equate things, you know, like if I get rid of this, then I might as well get rid of the Eucharist.
Yeah. Equivocation is dangerous.
Well, what happened? You know, why are you saying these crazy things? So,
and you know, the Sunday school is really something very new. We did not have it since the time of the apostles. It has not been in Egypt for 2,000 years. Doesn't mean the education is in there. Religious education, upbringing, and formation was in there. No, it was there. It just wasn't done this way. And the reason it's done this way is important to consider, whether it still makes sense. Like, it made sense in the mid 20th century Egypt. Does it still make sense in 21st century multicultural America?
I agree with you, Canada? 1,000%.
We have to ask that question. Yeah. But to be honest, when I read this in Exarium, and this is my little rant that I have to do in every episode, is that I see that parents taught the child the ways of God. Parents taught the child the books of the church. I never see parents took the children to someone to teach them, right? We have that very important vocation of incarnating the light of the gospel in the lives of the children, right? And if we outsource it, if we just tell them, you know, get someone else to teach you, I'll be the chauffeur, I'll drive you to church, and they can teach you, something drops in all of this. Then it just becomes like this head knowledge. Faith is just about knowing some facts and information dissemination, and basically once you have the right amount of information, that's good enough. That's really all that religious upbringing is all about, just having the right information. Whereas when we read the history of the church, and in the Synexarium especially, and the lives of the saints, we see that it did not happen this way. Yeah. You know, they had an example at home. They had a mom and dad who would pray. They had a mom and dad who would give alms. They had a mom and dad who would forgive, and they had a mom who would practice the virtues, right? It's not just about taking them to Sunday school.
Yeah, no, I agree 1,000% with that. I mean, when you know, Habib Gerges, Saint Habib Gerges, and Pope Shenouda and Nazir Gayed, you know, they started this Sunday school movement. It was in a time of massive ignorance in the church. Right. You know, the priests were ignorant. They didn't give sermons. There weren't any books. People were illiterate. It was a bad time in the church, and they were solving that problem. And again, this is the beauty of tradition, right? Tradition is not the same as imitation. Right. You don't just do what the you know, if they had stopped and said, well, you know, the apostles didn't have Sunday school, so we're not going to have Sunday school. I mean, no, they saw a problem and they innovated. Right. You know, they fixed it. And this kind of this closed-mindedness of tradition as imitation is dangerous, right? Because it's not the history of the church. It's not orthodoxy. In fact, you know, when you look at the Quran, it's not one word of the Quran is to be changed, altered, edited, deleted, added to, blah, blah, blah. And then you say, oh, is this where we're getting our thinking about tradition? We're not one word, like I have to give it exactly as I received it. Well, that's not necessarily true if the situation has changed, you know. You know, the example that Ambassador Serapion actually, you know, said to me was like, look at St. Anthony. He's like, he invented monastic. he just made it up. He just started it. And then the church saw it. He didn't go and get, approval from the synod, and he innovated. And that innovation caught on,
Right.
And people imitated it, obviously. So, going back to Sunday school, not only does the Synaxar, it doesn't even just say, taught them, it didn't say speak about God. They lived it, right? And the kids breathed it,
Right.
and they knew that their parents didn't talk badly about people, and they saw people coming over their house at 1:00 in the morning because they're fighting with their spouse, and their mom handling the situation and bringing in this person who's a beggar off the street. And that's what they saw. They saw their parents live it, not just talk about it, not just say, go to Sunday school, I'm going to go to Starbucks, and when Sunday school's over, call me and I'll come get you,
Absolutely.
I'm going to go to my own thing. And so that constant kind of innovation, that's truly traditional, right? That's what the church always does. And we needed information dissemination back then because there was, no books in the country. So these people would drive to a central location, read a book, write it down on a piece of paper, and then drive to whatever village and say the words.
Right.
But now I've got Google. I've got every book known to man on PDF, right? We have a flood of information, right? Information is not our problem anymore.
Right.
So, Sunday school's kind of solving that issue. Like, let's tell the kids a Bible story. All these kids, their parents read Bibles at home, and there's tons of kids' Bibles and picture Bibles and all the videos and games and puzzles. Everything's, now the kids' issues, right? It's depression, it's anxiety, it's loneliness. It's, these are the issues of our day.
The issues of the day, that's what I was going to say.
And we need to pivot. We can't just say, well, this is what worked. It worked in the 50s in Egypt, but we have a different issue now. If I want a lesson on Saint Athanasius, I'll Google it. There's a 1-page summary, a 10-page summary, and a 1,000-page summary on, and everything in between. Yeah. So
that word that you started, like, if I want.
Exactly.
Right. If I want. Do I want?
Do I want? And so inspiration is the key now, right? If I can inspire the kid and feel love in me, and he gets that spark of the Holy Spirit, the sky's the limit. Kid can be a PhD scholar, whatever, right? After being a drug addict, but you have to give him that spark. And the spark, and what all the kids are saying, especially in these surveys, is I want to see a spark in someone else. And that spark is infectious, and it just communicates itself from person to person. And you see this, you see someone like Abuna Bishoy Kamil, he goes, everyone around him becomes a priest, bishop, or a monk. Yeah. It's like, what happened? He infected them all, with that spark of the Holy Spirit.
Absolutely. So clearly this ministry is not one of those safe ministries where it's straightforward what to do, how to address issues, that you're constantly getting challenged with very complex issues, and how to deal with them, must place a lot of weight on your shoulders. How do you navigate all the complexities? I mean, it can be easy, it can be simple or straightforward.
It isn't. There's lots of opinions. And, I have to say that a huge part of this is His Eminence Metropolitan Serapion. He's so supportive and so encouraging. And I won't share all the things he says when we meet privately, but he's very encouraging. And, that one of the things, he said, he's the one who said that example about internal bleeding. He said, some people, when you say, look, that guy over there is bleeding, they're looking for blood. And if they don't see blood, they're like, he's not bleeding. There's no problem. I don't see the problem. But you do see the problem. So you have to, as a doctor, address that problem, right? Because that guy's about to drop. And so the encouragement is always, you just do what's right, and you can't necessarily wait for consensus. This is a safe place, if you will, to innovate. I run everything by him. I run everything by His Grace Bishop Kyrillos as well. I have a group of people that I trust dearly, a few clergy, a few lay people. We think a lot about everything, and we talk a lot about everything, and we sift through it. And of course we're going to make lots of mistakes, and someone's going to say that's a really bad idea, and I'm going to say you're probably right, then we'll probably scrap it. And there's already been a few ideas we've thought about and just scrapped or sidelined for another time. And so I think, one of the beautiful things about the way, I keep talking about the LA Diocese, I'm sorry, but the way it's sort of managed is it's managed like a portfolio, right? There is no single solution here, right? You have people that were in Egypt, 2 days ago. And there's people who were on the streets of Canada and America 2 days ago who are new to the church and married an Egyptian, whatever, or you can't serve them the same, and then everything in between. The person's been here 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. They're all different. So the best solution isn't trying to find a solution. It's to find a portfolio of solutions, right?
Right.
Everyone serves in different ways, and the people who have that need will gravitate toward that service. So you don't have to limit it, because we're in a 50-year transition period, right? This is going to take a while to flesh out. So there's all levels, and so you just have to meet everyone where they're at, the way Christ did. It's just a challenging time for the church, and I think we're doing a decent job meeting, the people who come from Egypt. Serving them the way they were served in Egypt, and that's what they want, and that's what they deserve, and that's what they should get. I'm all for Arabic liturgies. That's, in fact, I love Arabic liturgies personally, but that's the language. That's how they pray, and don't ever take that away from them. And in our diocese, we have Arabic youth meetings, and they're youth meetings for kids are like 20s, 30s, and they speak Arabic, and that's their primary language. And when they go to the English meeting, and you can make the argument they need to learn English, they need to adapt. They go to the English meeting, and people make fun of their accent, and they're not funny, and their jokes don't land. They just don't fit in.
Right.
And so I actually personally, I love to go to the Arabic retreats. I give talks in Arabic, and I enjoy that vibe. It's a very energetic vibe.
Right.
And we're meeting them. That's their need. And yeah, they'll be American someday. And when they are, they'll go to the other meeting, right? And so I don't think there is a solution. There's just a ton. And the more solutions you can put out there, you're going to find a small pocket of people, like this, like the His Beloved group that we have, right? This is a group for, people who are LGBTQ and struggling. And it's a support group. We meet twice, once every 2 weeks. And, it's not for everybody. It's for a very small pocket it's a group of lepers, who can't come to church or, are known or ostracized. And so we reach out and find them where they are, and so I think that's kind of the key is to produce as many services as possible. And if someone says, well, we don't need that, the answer is someone may need that, right? And if a small enough group, if a group needs it, then we'll try to provide something,
right,
for that group.
And I can imagine, a lot of trust and is required for a meeting, for a service like this.
Yeah.
And anonymity perhaps is also
absolutely, yeah. So, I'll do a shameless plug. The group is called His Beloved. The website hisbeloved.co. And it's a support group, and obviously confidentiality is a huge part of it. Everybody in the group actually knows everyone. Like they don't hide their cameras and they don't hide their names. They're actually, open with one another, and it's the most beautiful service I'm a part of, because here's a group of people who are just really, really struggling, and they want to be true to their faith. They want to, and they don't want to be like this. And we don't, it's not conversion therapy. We're not trying to change them. We're not trying to shame them. And we just offer them the gospel. We present Christ to them, and we meet them where they are, and we're there, and we're just going to walk on that journey with them. And that's all we can do, and just be friends, and it's, again, a community of sinners, and we're all bound together, trying to help one another. And so, yeah, there might be some people like, oh, look at what these people are, and our community loves to fill in the blanks, right? They're supporting whatever, and they're, and people can say whatever they want, right? But again, having the blessing of Eminence Serapion, he went through our website, and we have a different clergy member attend every 2 weeks, every other meeting. Sorry. So like Emba Krillos has attended, and lots of different priests have attended from all over the country, actually, and from Canada.
This is an online meeting.
It's online. It's on Zoom. Yeah. And so yeah, we try to keep that that connection, of course, with the church, but at the same time meet them where they are. And so yeah, there's lots of opinions out there.
I can imagine, but this is exactly what a group like this needs, is a group, is a community. It's very lonely and isolating trying to go through something like this all on your own.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out, how do I do this? How can I make it? If if I'm expected to do it by myself, I don't know if I have the strength.
Yeah.
And things can get very dark very quick. But with a group, a service like this, I can imagine that it gives hope, right? It provides light. Before I move on to another question, I want to move back to something. You mentioned His Eminence a few times, and I've met Sayyidina a couple of times in the past. He's a lovely person, and he has a vision about what American Orthodox means. And this is something I took from his inaugural message to the Rediscover I Am on YouTube. He said the early immigrants, they came, established churches, and how they essentially established the churches was as their churches in Egypt. But now with the new generation coming, we have these issues coming, not only related to the language, whether we use English or not, but also is related to the culture, where we are in this society. And it was very simple for the kids in early time of the immigration to ask about their identity. Are we American or Egyptians? Now we are trying to solve this problem by saying we are Christian, we are Orthodox Christian, we live in America, and we are Americans. But what is important is that we are Christian Orthodox. And the challenge for us is how the faith, which we received from Egypt, how we present it without any change in the American culture, where we live today, how we express our Orthodox faith in the American culture. Discernment is really what's needed. What is related to the culture, Sayyidina says, and what is related to the faith. And from the culture here, what is the positive things in the culture, and what are the negative things in the culture which we have to overcome. So this is Sayyidina's vision. This is how he's approaching it, that we're American. We can't pretend that we are in the diaspora and our roots lie in Egypt, in the sense that we are Egyptians, but Egyptians living in America. We are Americans, and we need to see ourselves as this. But there's another vision, and this is something that came up recently, and it was something that happened in Canada. And it was when His Holiness visited Canada in 2014, and there was a story about one of the churches he visited. He was here for about a month, and one of the churches he visited almost all the churches in Canada, which is a huge feat. So one of the churches, a youth choir presented, and one of the songs was all about the trees in Canada and the rivers in Canada and the weather in Canada. And Sayyidina realized that there's nothing mentioned about Egypt. There's a lack of connectedness. There's no prayer about Egypt and the Nile and the weather in Egypt. Nothing about Egypt. So a lack of connectedness. And this is what prompted him to do the Logos Youth Forum, where he invited youth from all over the world in order to re-establish that connection with Egypt. Now, whether or not this was effective and how effective really is up for debate. But you see, it's a different approach. We are Egyptians living abroad, or no, we're American. This is where we are, and we need to meet the people. That expression you keep saying, and an expression I heard from others as well. If you're aware of Amba Samuel, that was his thing. That was his motto: meet the people where they are. And for us living, in the West, thinking of ourselves as Easterners living in the West, or coming to the realization that we actually live in the West. This is where we are. This is how we see ourselves. It's two different visions. There are some common elements, but we see something like the American, or the establishment of the American Orthodox Church. And I remember when news of that came out, it was, like you mentioned, it was scandalous. it was something like, what's going on? Like, are we abandoning the faith? Are we no longer calling ourselves Coptic? And this happened in LA, and I believe also happened in SUS Copts with Mbe Yusuf. And for something like this, to put American in the name is not only, like you mentioned, destigmatizing what we think of the West, what we think of America, but it's also providing this way of making a footprint that is uniquely and authentically American Orthodox. So in doing this, do you find that the pushback on this idea is coming from, well, rather than pushback, do you find acceptance for this idea limited to a certain age group, or is it more widespread? How are people receiving this idea? How have people received it? I believe it's been in practice for a few years now, for a number of years, maybe 5 years.
No.
More?
The American Coptic Church.
Yeah.
Our church is ours is the first church in the first American Coptic Church, and we're 12 years old.
12 years old. Okay. So how has
the American Coptic Church experiment, I think is, if I had to characterize it, I'd say it was successful. I think when we first came out, it was scandalous, as I'm sure you guessed, and people would just say all kinds of things. But one of the things we focused on at St. Paul's a lot was being very Orthodox, and so we actually focused more on the teachings of the fathers and sort of deep spirituality, and just simply didn't talk about culture. Like the amount of debates every church has about English versus Coptic versus Arabic. I mean, how much time is wasted between deacons and people and fighting, and we no longer had to have that debate. So all that time we then shifted to a women's meeting and a men's meeting and study of the fathers and studies of the liturgy and kind of digging deeper into the faith. So I think very quickly people realized, in fact, His Eminence, one time was joking and someone made a comment about the American church or about our church, and he said, I love this comment. He said, the St. Paul's is the most Orthodox church I have in my diocese. It's a beautiful little comment. And so I think that's, people quickly realize, we're not out trying to change the world. And we're also not saying that you have to be like us. We're not saying anyone else is wrong. Right. It's a group of people saying, this is how we want to worship. This is just a small piece. And if you don't want to, if that's not, that's great. You prefer Arabic. That's good. I prefer English. That's good too, right? Just like you prefer Arabic, I can prefer English. And so that's it, right. And so there isn't, at some level, when you attend an American Coptic church, it's kind of, it's not a big deal. It's anticlimactic. You get there and you're waiting for, fireworks to go off.
I'm waiting for the heresy.
Yeah, and it's just an English liturgy, right? Yeah. Just, nothing has happened that's unique, And we throw a few in.
You're disappointed. I didn't see anything scandalous.
Yeah, it's really nothing exciting, Right. But what's nice about it isn't the liturgy. Every church has an English liturgy. That's not a big deal. Yeah. Every church in our diocese, prays an English liturgy. It's really the hall after. Because when you go in the hall after, everyone's speaking English. You can relate to people. You get, the people, that you can find community with, right? That understand you, that get your jokes, and that you're funny too, and so you feel home. You feel welcome. Like everyone's like me, and that's it. That's the big difference. So it isn't even the English part. It's not like we teach anything or do anything different. Right. It's just the culture in the hall afterwards, right? And so everyone is someone you can relate to, and the youth like it because there's a lot more harmony between the youth and the adults, because the adults are all like me, old men who grew up in the United States, and we tell jokes, and we know who's playing on Sunday, and we know what football's going on, and we can talk about Taylor Swift, and we could do all the things. So so that I think now I think it's settled down a little bit, and nobody, I don't think people see it as the threat that it used to be. It just, and now I think most of the new churches that have started in the diocese are actually American churches.
Right.
And we do find that the youth, they kind of grow up in the traditional church. And I don't want to say traditional, another church. And then a lot of them will sometimes just, as they get married and they have kids, they'll start to come.
They gravitate towards.
It's very, very slow, right? There wasn't a lot of quick movement,
right?
Which is good. The church shouldn't have a lot of quick movement. It's dangerous to move too quickly in the church. It's a slow moving thing. And so changes have to be made slowly and methodically. And then you make a change and then you wait. And then you kind of watch how it happens, right? It's kind of like a big oil tanker, right? You just can't turn it very quickly. No. So you make a change, you wait, you look at what things you didn't think about, what are the unintended consequences, what went right, what went wrong, and then you adjust on the next one, right? And then that's sort of the way you operate. And so even with this ministry, we decided, we had lots of ideas of things to do, and we were just going to go crazy. And then like, no, we're going to do 3 this year. And we're just going to focus and execute on each one slowly and see how it's received and see what the feedback is. And thank God, most of the stuff we're doing is on parenting and on relationships. And we see this as a big need. There's just lots of divorces and fights and all kinds of things. And the reception has been very, very good, like just overwhelmingly good. And so we're happy with that. And so we're continuing that, and we're slowly kind of adding ministries one at a time after we think about them carefully, and through your prayers and and God's grace, we
God willing.
Yeah.
So the first one was the parents ministry and focusing on that.
Yeah. So we started an Instagram page, Rediscover I Am, just one word. There's another shameless plug. And then the website rediscoveriam.org. I'm sure you'll post all these things, but. And then, the parenting ministry was very important because everyone's suffering, we had already started the His Beloved ministry, and then
was that also part of the department?
It got morphed into the department because I was part of its launch, before the department. This was a few years ago when we launched His Beloved. And then it just sort of, melded its way into the department. And so I think at some level, it's sort of picking up different ministries that have the same cohesive theme, and it's organizing them, we're trying, and we have lots of different ideas, especially around new couples and premarital counseling. And that seems to be like a focus that we're, really hitting, because I think, strong families make strong churches, and like you said earlier, right? It's every story in the Cynics are. So if you can get the family going, and you got to teach them how to be a strong family when they're in the 8th grade, that's when it starts. And if I don't see that example at home, to the best of the ability, the church can supplement and try to inject what that looks like. And if we can create these mature, emotionally spiritual people that eventually become great husbands and great mothers, and sacrificial and Christ-like, then the kids just naturally Abuna Dawood Lemay has this great thing. He says, Terbeyat Chirib, upbringing just gets absorbed by the kids, So as a parent, you don't have to do much. You just have to be. And the kids just absorb it.
That's right. They're not going to listen to you as much as they follow your example.
Exactly. They're not going to listen to you at all. In fact, if you say it, they won't do it.
But if you do it,
they'll do it.
So parents is one of the areas that you focus on. What are the other 2?
Well, we also focus on Coptic Clubs, so the that's
campus ministry. How has that been? Was it just started with the launch of the department, or has it been happening
No, it
before?
started actually, a funny story. His Grace Emba Carlos and I started Coptic Clubs at the same time. He started in UCLA. I started at Cal Poly Pomona in 1993.
That's when you were in
college,
school.
Yeah.
In college.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was when the first Coptic Clubs started, and then quickly after, several other Coptic Clubs, and now I think we have like 16 Coptic Clubs. Recently, we're organizing We've assigned the Coptic Clubs into regions. So there's 3 regions. East,
All in LA.
All in LA, yeah. LA is a
3
big
regions.
place.
Wow.
So the southern region, the eastern region, and the western region. And we now have 2 priests assigned to each region.
Mm-hmm.
And the job of the priests, again, the Coptic Club isn't really part of the church. It's the kids are doing it. And we sort of want to protect that. Like it's their thing. And they're going to make mistakes, and that's okay.
Yeah.
We're going to let them learn and grow. And the priest job,
space for that.
give them space, right? But the priest job is just to be there to meet them where they are, right? Meet them on campus. So we encourage the clergy to go meet them for confession, meet them for coffee, show up to campus, pray liturgies there, be a present on the campus, not there to get involved in the politics of the club or the running or what should we do or what should not try to control them, but rather just to serve them where they are. And then we're looking at other ministries. We're looking at creating a discipleship program for. We think discipleship is key, and it's the model that Christ used. It's the model that the monks used. It's the model that the fathers used. It's the model, and right now
go and make disciples. It can be.
I mean, that's it.
It's more straightforward than that.
And it's what Jesus did, And so right now our model is more of give talks, give lessons, give classes, give lectures, which is okay. And I think when the ratio of speakers to people served is not good, a lecture to 200 people is the most efficient way to get there, right? I can't disciple 200 people. But as that number increases and I have more people, then God willing, I can have more discipleship and sort of break the world up into smaller pieces. So one of the things we really want to figure out how to do is add more discipleship to the model in particular. And whether that be youth or even couples, I actually got this idea from my uncle, Abun Antonius Yunen in Mansoura. He did this 50 years ago. Every time a couple got married, he would assign them to a senior couple in the church. And he said, you meet with them once a month, you guys have dinner. If you have a problem, they're your first call. And they mentored them, and he said his number of marital problems dropped dramatically.
Makes sense.
Right. And because, and now it's creating community, right? There's a bond between you and another couple. And they don't have to be old. They could be 5-10 years married, whatever, but just assigning them to someone, said, that's your first line of defense. Right. And, so we want to formalize a program like that throughout the diocese, maybe pilot it in a few churches. But, if we can get every church to pick 4 or 5 couples, and when you get married, you say, here's your 5 couples, pick one, the one you're comfortable with. And that's your mentors, and, you can train those couples and say, here's the things we elevate to Abuna. Here's the things you don't talk about. Here's the things we don't get involved with. If you see this, call us a therapist, so there's bigger, but most things are, that first couple of years of marriage, he fights about this and then, I'm sad about that. And then you just need someone to tub and say, it's okay. Like we fight about the same things. Like, oh, okay, this is normal.
Yeah.
And
helps put things in perspective.
Everyone's calms down, So
the Syriac Orthodox Church, they have that assigned senior couple as part of the ceremony.
Oh, wow.
So they have the couple standing before the altar with the bride and groom.
Really?
And they also have prayers for them.
Really?
And it's like sponsors for or the guardians for baptism.
But
they have them for the couples.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Exact. And before the altar, they have this responsibility given to them that you're gonna care for them. You're their sponsor. You need to follow up with them and take care of them. And it's beautiful, and it makes sense.
It makes perfect sense,
right? No one knows how to be married. And until you're married, and then you're like, you have all these questions. Who do I go ask? Well, I can maybe go ask Abuna, but I can't ask him for every single question. And then when you have a couple like that, it makes perfect sense.
I mean, and I think one of the things that I see a lot is people don't want to serve. They think Abuna has to do everything, and it's just not the case. I mean, the clergy's job is the mysteries, it's the sacraments, and outside of that, do they need to teach every class at the seminary? No, you can have a scholar who teaches something. Do they have to do, your kids on drugs? Do you call it? No, there's a treatment center for that. You're having marital problems. Okay, maybe there's a spiritual component, but the rest of it could be couples therapy, right? So this whole idea of just going back to Abuna as it floods Abuna with stuff that doesn't necessarily have to be him, and I love the idea of an Ishbin, for this. Maybe something we can, think about.
And the role of deacon, what I see mostly today is that the deacon is just a liturgy helper, like communion helper. That's about it. Whereas, serving table and serving, the widows, and there's a huge diaconal service ministry that is part of this rank.
Yeah.
And we're leaving all this undone, and it falls usually back on Abuna to manage it, to handle it, to assign someone to do it. You're a deacon, you're an archdeacon. So what does that mean? What does that entail in terms of services within the community, within the church? So you do speak. How is it that the diaconal service kind of plays out in your day-to-day?
I mean, I would say that probably most of the archdeacons in our diocese, I think we have like 20, sort of fit the mold that you talked about. They're usually older, and their job is primarily communion, giving the blood. And recently, Sedna has ordained now one or two of us who our job is more about service, and to truly be a servant of the people. And so, I always kind of envision the deacon, if you look at it historically, the priest he's the mysteries, he's the church, he's the sacraments, and the deacon at some level becomes sort of this interface between the mysteries and the people, and so in the early church, as the deacon would take communion to those who were sick, those in prison, those who couldn't come to the church. So he was that middle ground, and so his job is always the service of the people in any way. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, I'm definitely, I attend St. Paul's, and I've been there since its inception. But certainly and I've been an archdeacon for 6 years or something, 6 or 7. But this new I've always sort of served the whole diocese. And I go to lots of different churches, and I put lots of miles on my car because I'm kind of running around a little bit, but it's truly a great blessing.
Would it make your service easier if you had a helicopter, perhaps?
I've said that to a few churches. I'll go there, and it's like a 2.5-hour drive, and then they'll say, can you come back every month? And I'm like, get me a helicopter, and I'll come back.
No problem.
But so there's a lot of running around, but thank God there's such a nice spirit. There isn't my church, your church, my youth, your youth, my meeting, your meeting. The kids are running around between meetings. There's a meeting every night at some church, and some churches are like, why even start a meeting? There's a meeting down the street here, and there's a meeting down the street here. Why do we need our own meeting? And they encourage their youth, go to that meeting, go to that meeting, go to this Abuna, go to, so there's a beautiful koinonia there of
spirit of cooperation.
Yeah, and no one's out grabbing all the people and doing all
sheep stealing or anything.
Yeah, exactly, right. And no one thinks of it that way, and there's lots of meetings that are just for youth, right? Whoever comes so that's nice. So I've been doing I do a lot of that type of stuff, I think, and definitely this new ministry is a lot. It's getting something up and running just takes a lot of time.
I'm sure.
And organizing, and I send 50 texts a day, just trying to keep up on different things, and everything is just takes time.
Of course, and it's not just starting a new service, but a service where there are a lot of opinions about which direction to take, and you have to think and consider all these opinions and all these ways of doing this, and it puts a lot of responsibility on you, right? So do you have anything that's coming down the pipe, anything in the plans that you're able to speak about?
Oh, like a new ministry? gee, I'm sort of drawing a blank right now on all the different things we're doing. I'm excited about sort of the Coptic Club and discipleship and being there for these kids, for the big things. Obviously, it doesn't replace the confession father in any way, but there's all these little things, do I talk to this girl, or how do I deal with this situation or this, and so it'd be nice that if the community can give back to itself. We have so many people who've graduated from these colleges, and so many people want to give back. And I think giving them an outlet, an ability to give back, I so many adults, 40s come up to me and they're like, hey, anytime you need me, just let me know how I can help. So many people say that, right? And then you see all that untapped potential of all these people, right? And they're successful, spiritual, great people. They aren't on the speaker, circuit running around giving talks, but they're great mentor people. And then you have the priest buried, underwater and unable to breathe, and you're like, okay, there's a disconnect here, right? And so we've kind of gotten this mindset of like, well, only the priest can serve, and that's Abuna's job, and I'm not going to, there's a person who wants to, become an atheist. You want to go talk to him, and you're like, no, Abuna will do that, right? And it's like, well, not everybody should talk to that person, but there are some people who can, and relate their experience and handle it and listen. Why do you become? And then you figure out it's nothing with atheism. It's about a problem I have with this girl, right? Or my parents, and then that's why you want to become an atheist, right? And so we're thinking atheism. We're scared of the word, and all of a sudden it's just, well, here's what your dad's really trying to say,
right?
And he loves you very much, and okay, I'm not an atheist anymore, So sometimes crises can be averted just by having somebody there who can listen.
Absolutely, 100%. And with the priest, like you say, being buried, and then you have all this untapped potential, it takes a special person to kind of be in the right place at the right time to say, you know what, I can help you organize. I can point you in the right direction. I know where there is a need, and you're connecting, the people with the time to the people who have the need. And that's very important. There's definitely something that, I have a long way to go in terms of being organized and recognizing this, and just not like taking things on my own shoulder, and recognizing the gifts that God is giving to people to go and serve and minister and be a light to the world. Discipleship, parenting, and campus ministry.
And I think the last thing that the big one that I'm eager to start is really dealing with the problem of pornography. It's just rampant, and figuring out a way to create something that people won't be ashamed to come to, that maybe maintains your privacy in some way, but something that pairs you with a mentor or somebody who's another Ishbeen, maybe, someone who's responsible, someone you can go to when you're tempted. And so I think we really need to address this issue, not just because lust is bad. It's because it's destroying marriages. Absolutely. Right, and destroying relationships, and actually creating a backlog, because there are guys don't want to get married, because I have porn, and whatever, right? So it's creating all kinds of these issues, and so that's the next thing that God willing we're vetting, we're going through, we're thinking about the best way to do it. There's lots of churches, Abuna Paul in DC has done some great stuff. Other churches have done great stuff. There's lots of programs out there. I think it's just a matter of time for us to kind of go through and sort of institutionalize something for our diocese. Be a resource, right? Every priest hears it every confession. So if he can point and say, hey, there's a program out there that might help you, and then offload it off his, really our job is to make Abuna's life easier, honestly. Like if we can offload things, something he trusts, something that's run by the diocese, and say, hey, there's a program here by the diocese, check this out, see what you think, or it's one less, headache for him. Absolutely. So that's a big thing we also want to work on.
And with that, I want to thank you very much for your time and your wisdom, and I'm going to be continuing to look at your ministry with great interest. This is a lot of amazing stuff. So if there's one thing you want to end with as a kind of message of hope when it comes to church and culture, what would you say?
I think the message is sort of the thing that we have on all of our merch, which is see Christ, know Christ, be Christ, which is actually the theme of the retreat that we're going to attend, you and I, soon. But I think we just have to go back to the basics, and I think we keep our eye on Him, and He will, He guides, and so seeking Him, and then knowing Him, and then being Him. I think if that's our focus, then all these things get solved naturally and without too much problems, God willing.
Beautiful words to end on. Thank you so much, Archie.
Thank you so much, Ivan.
And I hope you come visit back.
Thank you very much.
Again,
I'll come in the summer. This one is...
Yeah, I'd recommend waiting till the summer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. For questions, comments, feedback, or if you'd like to make a suggestion on a topic for a future episode, please feel free to reach out to the email in the bio. And don't forget to subscribe to get a notification when new episodes drop. God bless you and have a great day.